Hello everyone, this is Grunch, and I am back with another Gatecrash draft preview, this time white and Boros cards. But before I get too into that, I want to thank my man, Tom Garton, also known as The Boonie, for this amazing intro panel we have. So let's get right into it. First card's kind of a clunker, Aerial Maneuver, white and colorless, instant, gives a creature +1/+1, flying in first strike. It's a white combat trick. Usually these come with a little bit more involved. Meh. You can get your combat tricks elsewhere. Moving on though, we have a better card, an Angelic Edict. 5 mana, sorcery, exile, target creature or enchantment. This is the kind of thing that in Seal deck you would bend over backwards to play. You would splash this into your Dimir deck every time if you had any Orzhov Guild Gates, that kind of thing. In draft, decks are a little more focused, a little bit faster. 5 mana removal can be kind of clunky, but it's still removal. It still kills anything. So while we're going to pick this, we don't want to first pick it, second, maybe even third, but if it's mid-pack, yeah, grab it. And speaking of removal, we have Arrows of Justice. 3 mana, one of which is a white and red hybrid, instant, 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. This is actually pretty solid removal. It's slightly awkward in that if you're on offense, it doesn't technically clear a blocker out of the way, although that blocker is gone and didn't kill your attacking creature, so it's missing a little bit of damage compared to, say, an arrest or something like that on offense, and on defense, they have to kind of walk into it, but still, removal is removal. You're going to take what you can get on that regard. And in that vein of sort of taking what you can get, we have Assault Griffin. I'm pretty sure this is a reprint. 3/2 flyer for 4 mana. Not exciting, but you need evasion sometimes to finish the job, and 3 power is enough that he'll, get it done, I suppose. It's actually kind of amazing how much worse Snapping Drake is in white than in blue, simply because white gets so much better cheap creatures overall. But, in any case, it's probably toward the top end of your Boros deck, and sort of smack in the middle for your Orzhov deck. Not exciting, but it's going to get played. Next card on the block is the Basilica Guards. 3 mana, 1/4 with Defender and Extort. So I think this is a good starting point to talk about Extort. These effects are very, very interesting to me. On the one hand, they're reach. They're going to kill your opponent for you, which kind of seems like it points towards use in an aggressive deck. On the other hand, they require you to pay extra mana for your spells, they give you life, and you can use them more freely as the game goes on. So they make lots of interesting decisions, like, do I cast this guy now when I can only use one Extort trigger, or wait until I make another land so that I can use both of my Extort triggers on the battlefield? As a general rule, my overall feeling is that these cards are going to be better in decks that want to play a longer game, because you're allowed to use them more freely, so to speak, and it's not going to be that difficult to get a variety of these guys, get several extort effects on the board, and once you're getting, say, to drain your opponent for 3 and gain 3 life for every spell you cast, that's a pretty big deal, but it takes a while to get there. So I think, on the whole, Orzhov decks are going to want to be a little more defensive. They're going to be kind of the controlling decks in the format. But that's not to say that these cards have no use in Boros. They do still drain your opponent out. The Basilica Guards, probably not so much in that regard. Having Defender, they're kind of a horned turtle that sits there and gives you some value later in the game. Not even a horned turtle, because he could help trigger Battalion. This is a wall. So this is an Orzhov card, but as far as telling you where to pick it in the pack, kind of want to play with Extort before I figure that out. Something I don't need to play with before I can tell you it's amazing is the Boros Charm. So just like all the other charms, we got to evaluate all 3 modes. So Boros Charm deals 4 to target player. Alright, let's stop right there. That alone would be a perfectly fine spell. 2 mana, get them for 4. That's about as powerful for 2 mana as exists in the entire game of Magic. You can't really... I can think of, I guess, maybe Fiery Conclusion or Shrapnel Blast for 2 mana could get you more damage than that. And those are giving up something very real, whereas this is just, yeah, I get you for 4. Yeah, this card's gonna be a nightmare in constructed for control decks. Moving along, we have permanents you control are indestructible. Yep, that's a sweet one. Rootborn Defenses is a fantastic limited card and has actually seen a little bit of play in constructed. And then target creature gains double strike until end of turn. So that's pretty good. That's kind of a combat trick, and as far as hurting your opponent, you're never going to use it unless it's dealing more than 4 damage, which means the times it does get used, it's going to be quite impressive. So that's kind of my verdict for Boros Charm. Quite impressive. Next, a card that some will be less impressed by, but I think you should be impressed by, is the Boros Elite, a single white mana for a 1/1 with Battalion, who becomes a 3/3. So, this is the kind of card that is obvious where it's going. It's going in the Boros Battalion decks. But in that context, I think he's very strong. There are actually a couple of 3-mana haste creatures, which means if you go 1-drop, 2-drop, hasty 3-drop, this guy's beating down on turn 3 for 3. That's pretty impressive. So while this guy is sort of all or nothing, and is sort of archetype specific, within that context, he's very good. So I think this is one of the reasons you would want to start off going Boros. The next card is the Boros Key Rune, templated just like the other Key Runes, and when it activates becomes a 1/1 red and white soldier with double strike. So first, let's be clear in that I think that more than any other deck in the format, the Boros decks are going to want to curve out aggressively every game. Key Runes do not help you do that. Granted, it is putting a creature on the board to allow you to attack with next turn, but it's not the sturdiest of creatures, and it's pretty far from being a haste creature. Boros decks are also going to be the decks that want the least top end, so the extra mana that you get out of him is probably less useful here than about anywhere else. However, there is one saving grace, and that's the double strike. There are a couple of ways to pump him up within just the Boros colors, but sometimes you're going to be playing a third color. When that third color is green, you're likely to have some Blood Rush effects. And when you Blood Rush your Boros Key Rune, people get hurt. They get hurt pretty bad. So while I don't think this is a particularly high pick if you're actually in just a strict Boros deck, if you're in an amalgamation of Boros Gruul, it moves up quite a bit. So, yeah, there you go. So the Court Street Denizen is a 3-mana 2/2 that whenever another white creature enters the battlefield under your control, tap target creature and opponent controls. So Gray Ogres have to come with some pretty sweet text, but this is some pretty sweet text. Probably not much of an Orzhov card, but Boros decks are going to want ways to allow them to attack into blockers while still playing lots of creatures. And this is one of the things that lets you do that. If you have multiples of these guys on the board, then every white creature you play is having multiples of their guys, and you can see how this gets out of hand. I think this is a surprisingly strong Gray Ogre. Along the lines of slightly better versions of previous cards, we have an upgrade of Blade of the Sixth Pride in Daring Skyjack. 2 mana for a 3/1 whose Battalion lets him start to fly. Speaking of flying, there's a fair amount of it in the Boros decks. And it's not unthinkable that with this guy being flyers and some other flyers, you might be just getting them in the air. That's totally sweet. And Blade of the Sixth Pride is about as aggressive as you can get. I mean, if you go Boros Elite into this guy into a haste creature, we'll see in a little bit, you're hurting your opponent for about 8 damage on the 3rd turn. So I think this guy is going to be one of the better commons in those Boros decks. As far as Orzhov goes, you might still play it just because it's an evasion guy and you want evasion. Next up, though, we have a card that's pretty obviously going into the Orzhov decks. It's Debtor's Pulpit. 5 mana for Enchant Land. Enchant Land can tap to tap target creature. For Boros, this is probably just too expensive. It's 6 mana if you want to use it the same turn, 5 if you want to wait and delay it a turn, and it's just a little too top heavy. It's just not quite doing what you want to do. It might still see play, I could be wrong, but I just don't see it. But the Orzhov decks want the game to go as long as they can so they can get as many extort triggers as they can, and this is the kind of effect that makes the game go for a while. So I think this probably goes in the Orzhov decks, although at the kind of rate you're paying for it, it's not a super high pick. staying in the vein of Orzhov cards that make the game go longer, is Dutiful Thrall. 1 white for a 1/1 that you can spend 1 black to regenerate. So I don't think the Boros decks want this, although when you're desperate to get cheap creatures, you can have a white Mons Goblin Raider. You can probably do better than that almost always, but But in Orzhov decks, this is pretty sweet. It's obvious the Orzhov decks want to go on with the game. And in particular, the existence of this creature is one of the reasons I hyped up the trample so much during the Groll video. Trampling over this guy is about the best way you can do to ignore him, that or fly. And if you aren't doing either one of those, this card's exceedingly annoying. Moving along, we have the Fortress Cyclops. 3 colorless, a red and a white for a 3/3. Whenever he attacks, he gets +3/+0, and whenever he blocks, he gets +0/+3. So this is kind of a strange creature in that he's doing completely different things, one side or the other. But I think we can be simpler than that. He's a red and white creature that costs 5 mana, and he's not impressive, right? You just look at him and you go, well, what am I don't know. Where do we do with this? Do we block a Zerta Swine? Do we attack for enough power to kill some stupid wall? I don't know, but it doesn't really matter. He's 5 mana, and he's not impressive, and he's in the colors that want the cheapest spells of all, so I think this is just really kind of poor. Just poor. Less poor, however, is Guardian of the Gateless. A white and 4 colorless 3/3 flyer who can block any number of creatures. Whenever it blocks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature that it blocks. So this is a pretty tough guy to attack into. I'm not necessarily saying that makes him a purely Orzhov card, although he's definitely great in the Orzhov decks. But Boros probably wants some flyers that they can get a hold of, and this will do that and attack and kill people. So 3/3 flyers unlimited, generally speaking, you want them. At 5 mana, he's not exceptional, but given that he can stall the ground from a swarm, he's doing quite a bit. So yeah, this is probably a decently high pick. A much worse card next in Guild Scorn Ward. 1 colorless enchanted creature gets protection from multicolored. This is pretty much a sideboard card for those times when your opponent seems to have nothing but gold creatures. Now I'll grant that for the most part, the gold creatures, the gold spells, tend to be the ones that are pushed in the set, but that doesn't mean that your opponent's going to have all those cards most of the time. A lot of monocolored cards are going to get played, and this just doesn't do anything against them. So I think this is pretty much a sideboard card for weird situations. Along that theme of weird situations, we have Hold the Gates. 3 mana for an enchantment. Creatures you control get +0/+1 for each gate you control and have vigilance. So this is kind of a strange card. It's hard to evaluate. You have to get a whole bunch of gates in your deck, and then you have to want to make your guys have bigger toughness, and then you have to want them to have vigilance for some reason, and all of these are things Orzhov decks may want to do. This kind of helps the game go longer because your creatures are harder to kill. This helps attack with guys when you're not sure how aggressive to be, which kind of sounds like a description of an Orzhov deck, but you have to play lots of gates. Lots and lots of gates. Not sure if there's enough gates in this set to make this thing worth it, although sometimes it'll be sweet. I want to see those screenshots of you having +0/+4 in all your guys, but barring that, I think this is just a little too narrow most of the time. An enchantment that's definitely not too narrow, however, is Holy Mantle. 2 colorless, 2 white. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and protection from creatures. The best part of protection from creatures is that he's just unblockable. I think this card's gonna be pretty obnoxious. Just gonna kill you a lot of the times. I mean, +2/+2 and unblockable, that's kind of fierce. And there's some double strike in this set. It's running around. There's a little bit of double strike to be had, and putting this on something double strike, that's filthy. Just so filthy. Moving along, we have the Knight of Obligation. 4 mana for a 2/4 Vigilance with Extort. I think this is the kind of creature that could potentially actually go in your Boros deck, so let me evaluate it there first. Pillarfield Ox with Vigilance, Not super awesome for your Boros decks, but you're going to want a little bit of reach, and you want to try to get it as much as possible on creatures, because you have to be triggering Battalion for your best cards to be doing what they need to do. So I think this is a perfectly acceptable reach option for a Boros deck. But in an Orzhov deck, I think this is kind of your bread and butter. It blocks perfectly fine, it gets in when the opportunity presents it, it encourages the game to continue on for longer and longer, and it gains ever more value in that extort trigger. So I think this is pretty obviously an Orzhov staple. I mean, it's even watermarked, but I think it's going to show up in Boros from time to time as well. Moving along, we come to the Night Watch. 5 mana sorcery, put 2/2 white knight creature tokens with vigilance onto the battlefield. This card, I am not impressed by. Normally, putting 2/2 white knights on the board would be pretty sweet, especially in the set with Battalion, but at 5 mana, you almost have to ask if you'd rather just have a 4/4. I mean, a 4/4 is much harder to attack into. It is much more difficult to block profitably. It's just kind of better overall. And there are certainly 4/4s for 5 mana to be found in a couple of the big red idiots in the set. Sometimes this could help you just swarm your opponent. There are a couple of reasons why you might want to do that. But overall, I just don't think this is the right set for the card. If this were in Return to Ravnica, this would be a pretty sweet card, but we're not in that set anymore. We're crashing gates. So earlier I mentioned that you could find combat tricks better than aerial maneuver, I think it was. Well, here it is. Martial Glory. 1 white, 1 red. Target creature gets +3/+0, and a target creature gets +0/+3. So this can be a giant growth, but it's noticeably better than that. You can save your guy when your opponent wanted to trade. You can do that while still getting in 3-point damage to them. Or you can potentially save one guy and then make another guy trade up. There's a lot of flexibility to be had here, and I think this card's going to turn out to be pretty sweet. I think this is the kind of combat trick the Boros want to have. A card I'm much less excited by is Murder Investigation. 2 mana aura, enchant creature you control, which is an important point. Whenever enchanted creature dies, put X/1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is its power. So if you could put this on your opponent's guy, you could say, do that, and then kill their guy, and then get a bunch of 1/1s, and that'd be pretty sweet. But instead, this is sort of a, if you kill my guy, I get to sort of keep him kind of thing. Now, if you get a ton of power out of this, somehow your huge guy died while you had Murder Investigation on it, kind of sounds like you're in a situation where your opponent had no choice but to block some big stupid creature and kill it, and unfortunately they had to give you some guys. But for the amount of work you're going through, I just don't think this is worth it. Moving along, we have perhaps the most expensive Battalion trigger in this set. Nav Squad Commandos. 5 mana, 3/5, and his Battalion trigger gives him +1/+1 and untaps him. So we have a Siege Mastodon with a slight upside. Let that sink in for a bit. Siege Mastodon with a slight upside. Never going to be happy when you have to play this guy. You're going to play him, but you're never going to be happy. Much better Battalion trigger coming up in the Ordrun Veteran. 2 colorless, a white and a red for a 3/1, whose Battalion trigger gives him Double Strike. Now, Double Strike is pretty fierce. Let's be honest. It's potentially very, very damaging. And this is exactly the kind of Battalion trigger I like. I want my Battalion triggers to be all or nothing, because we have to go through a lot of work to make sure we're always on Battalion, and that we can always Alpha Strike into whatever board our opponent has. And if you're going to go through all that work, you really should get rewarded, and Double Strike is about the kind of reward you'd want. This guy is still not exactly what I would strictly call a pushed creature, so I wouldn't try to get him early, but since he's 4 mana and only goes in Boros, he isn't probably going to be taken early, so you can probably get him sort of mid to late in the pack. Next up, we have one of the most important cards in this set for limited. We have Righteous Charge. 1 colorless, 2 white. Creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. The reason this is one of the most important cards in the set for limited is that when you're figuring out what do I do on my turn, because how bad can my opponent hurt me next turn, you have to sometimes remember about Righteous Charge. And I think when you're trying to play around a Righteous Charge, it's going to force you to be exceptionally defensive. And so as a result, this is one of those things whose presence is going to, how do I put this, greatly affect the combat math for the next turn afterward. Now, it is a sorcery, so you're not getting ambushed by it. It's not insane. But it's extremely powerful when you need it. It's almost an overrun. And in particular, it's an almost overrun in the set that's trying to set up Battalion. In the guild that's trying to set up Battalion. So I think Righteous Charge, is one of the more important cards in this set. One of the least important cards in the set is Shattering Blow. Exile target artifact for 1 colorless and a white and red hybrid mana. It's Shatter, you'll sideboard it when you need it. Moving along. We come to Shielded Passage, 1 white, prevent all damage that would be dealt to target creature this turn. Okay, well, this is one of those things that helps you Alpha Strike into their board, but it's pretty narrow, it's pretty low impact, it's just pretty bad. Now this is something that's much better. Sky Knight Legionnaire. And if you don't remember what he does, you didn't play enough you didn't play enough Ravnica City of Guilds, and you are a heathen Pokemon child. So for those who don't remember, and for some reason have been struck blind by the awesomeness of this art, it is a 2/2 flying haste for 1 colorless, a white, and a red. Haste is fantastic when you're setting up Battalion, because it just gets Battalion online a full turn early. Flying is awesome because, well, it's harder to block, duh, and it kills people. So yeah, Sky Knight Legionnaire is awesome. A little less awesome, but still a card you're going to play quite a bit, is Smite. Also a reprint, I'm fairly certain. 1 white, destroy target blocked creature. This seems like the kind of ideal removal to get late in the pack to go in your Orzhov deck, where they just have to keep bashing into your Treasury Thole, but, oh, got you good, killed your dude, ha ha ha. Pretty good way to ambush somebody who's setting up a Blood Rush thing, try to trample over for some stupidly huge amount. Not the best, obviously, in your Battalion deck, because, well, you want to be attacking, you don't want to be blocking. Although there will be situations where you're swinging past them with flyers, and they're swinging into you with some big dumb idiot that you can't handle otherwise, so you smite it. But mostly this will be a sideboard card for the Boros decks, but one of the key removal spells for the Orzhov decks. Next we have what I think might be the best uncommon or common in the entire Boros available cards, the Sunhome Guildmage. 1 white, 1 red, 2/2, just like the other guild mages. So for a white, a red, and a colorless, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. This is awesome with any first strike guys, doubly awesome with any double strike guys, and just in general makes your guys trade up for theirs. And then for 2 colorless, a red and a white, you can put a 1/1 red and white soldier creature token with haste onto the battlefield, which means that this guy can continuously set up your Battalion triggers, and if the game goes long, he can chump block any gigantic dude, and if he doesn't have to be chump blocking and you're not in a position to be swinging for some reason, he's building up a swarm of guys who he can then at some point overrun to kill your opponent. This is possibly the best guild mage in the entire set, although they're all pretty good, but this guy's 2 abilities have such amazing synergy, not only within the Boros guild, but I think this is one of the very highest picks for the Boros decks. Probably a first pick if you decide you want to go into Boros. So next, we have a slightly less impressive, but still quite quality 2-drop. Syndic of Tithes. You get a Grizzly Bear with Extort. So, I've been kind of down on a lot of the Grizzly Bears so far in this set, mostly because they tend to get brick-walled by the other creatures in this set relatively quickly. But this guy is just all upside. Extort is one of the best ways for a creature to stay relevant as the game continues on, and while a Grizzly Bear isn't the most impressive of beaters, sometimes your opponent won't have a fast opening hand, or you'll have an opportunity to be aggressive for whatever reason, and then he'll get in. It blocks reasonably okay. I mean, you can't ask for too much out of a bear at common, and Extort's pretty solid, so I think I like this guy. 3 in a row here for Grizzly Bears I like, which is saying something good about the Boros available cards. Red and a white, 2/2 Vigilance. White and a red, True Fire Paladin gets +2/+0, and white and a red, True Fire Paladin gains first strike. So this guy has a lot of potential. He's extra damage to get through, he's a big guy to attack into if you have open mana. I just like this guy quite a bit. Overall, he's not as good as the Guild Mage, but I think there's a lot of room for a Grizzly Bear to be worse than your Guild Mage and still very good. A somewhat interesting card, an Urbis Protector. 4 colorless and 2 white for 1/1, and when he enters the battlefield, you put a 4/4 white angel creature token onto the battlefield. So this is kind of an air elemental with a 1/1 attached. If we had any Cloud Shift abilities, or for those of us who aren't filthy newbies, Momentary Blink, thank you, or Restoration Angel, I suppose. If we had any of those effects in the set, this guy would be potentially much more abusable. Granted, there are still a couple of ways to reset him, but they're off guild, they're blue and black, and you're not really gonna... Okay, that's not true. The black ones, you're gonna get value out of him. So, in particular, there's a... This is somewhat of a spoiler, but there's a black spell with Cypher that allows you to raise dead. Well, this seems like an awesome way to do that, because you play this guy, you attack with your angel, they attack, you throw your 1/1 away, and then you put your raised dead on your angel, and now every turn, if they dare attack into and kill your 1/1, you get to make an angel. It's a pretty sweet sort of pseudo soft lock to be setting up with only commons and uncommons. And while this guy is expensive for a Boros deck, he's a big finisher and 2 creatures for Battalion. So I think this is a relatively high pick, although the set might be too fast for him to be a first pick. Yet another 2-drop that I am quite happy to be playing in my Boros Battalion deck is Wojak Halberdiers, a white and a red for a 3/2, whose Battalion trigger gives him first strike. This is a very aggressive 2-drop. 3 power on turn 2. This is, what was its name? Garrux something or other for 3/2. Yeah, I can't remember what that card's called. Anyway, this is a sweet 2-drop, and when you Battalion it, it's going to be a tough guy to stop early in the game. There are a number of 2/4s in this set, so he will be brickwalled once in a while, but at 2 mana, at common, you can't ask for much better than this. And lastly, we come to the Zorichi Tiger. 3 colorless, a white, 2/3, spend a white, a colorless, and tap him, you gain 2 life. Now, this card is not impressive, I get that. You're looking at him and going, well, sweet art, but, I mean, come on, right? But here's the thing. I think your Orzhov decks want the game to go on for a while. And while this isn't an especially awesome way to extend the game, gaining life and blocking and regenerating as the Dutiful Thrall does, and gaining life as the Zorichi Tiger does, these things all add up to allowing you to stall out and maximize your extort triggers. So I don't think this guy is a terribly impressive card. I think his usefulness will be underrated by a lot of people. And that concludes the White and Boros video. Thank you for watching.